The Suikoden 1 and 2 remasters were one of the rare ones that I was actually pretty excited for. I played Suikoden 1 as a kid, like multiple times, and Suikoden 2 I've owned for a long time, but I bounced off it because I was following a character guide to how to get everybody, which you should not do for your first time ever playing a game. You should go through it blind, generally speaking, because there's a little bit of a drudgery and there's a loss of novelty to trying to maximize things in the first time you play through something. And man, I've been listening to the soundtracks in these games for years. As a lot of people have said in other videos, like this is sort of like the pinnacle of like pixel graphics in that era. Like one of the last truly beautiful 2D games. The music, I can't say enough how goddamn good it is. And like generally, this ability to have a castle that you build up over time is so intensely satisfying. So I have really, really good memories of this game, and I've always liked it quite a bit. Though Suikoden 1 is sort of a game that you breeze through. So having played both of them in a row now, I regret to say that it isn't quite the like underrated masterpiece that I always thought it was or had as the idea in my head. And just to review, I really, really like the more Eastern aesthetic to this game, particularly the second game, but both games have some of, honestly, the best town music themes of any RPG ever, and I'm not exaggerating. The softer, heart softening type themes are also like untouchable. There's something deeply satisfying, especially in the first game, whenever you get a cutscene, whenever your castle goes up at a level, to see how things have changed, to see the people, especially the non-battle characters, who start showing up at your fort, building up a team, how intriguing so many characters are, although as I get to later, you don't always necessarily get to use them a ton. And just generally, the story of this game and the aesthetic of it is incredibly good. However, these games, both of them, are a classic example of where gameplay 100% takes a backseat to story. And there is time after time after time where you wake up, you put together a party. In the first game particularly, they're like, okay, well, here's the next military event we're going to do. Put together a party. It does not matter who this party is. You go to a place. There's barely any dungeons in these games. And the dungeons you do see, generally speaking, are unimaginative and uninspired. There are not that many boss fights in either game. Both games played on hard is laughably easy. And time after time, you play through these games, you get a party put together. It doesn't matter who they are. You never know when you need to stop, interrupt the flow of action to equip your party and ideally stock them up properly, which you cannot do financially with more than a handful at a time unless you just spend a ton of time breaking the dice rolling game. The second game, they give you a lot better opportunity just to make tons of money just from fighting random battles, which sort of negates the trading post system to some degree, it feels like. But generally speaking, time after time after time, you never know when you have to break off the flow of story to get out of the way to make sure the party you're using is one that actually needs to be able to fight a tough boss. Most of the time, let's say 4 times out of 5 when you're supposed to assemble a party, it does not matter who you do. And then suddenly sometimes you're like, oh, okay, now suddenly I'm fighting a boss. This is particularly egregious in the second game at a certain point where you put together 3 parties and you don't know that 2 of them, it does not matter what happens, but the third one, it very much does matter. And the amount of times that you have to break out of things to leave and go into the town and set things up, it's just like a punishing and sort of random system. The second game, despite being an outstanding story, very reminiscent of Final Fantasy Tactics if you think about it, in terms of how Jowie and the main character are like kind of poised against each other, but with each other. It's very, very similar to the main story of the 2 main characters in Final Fantasy Tactics, honestly. But time after time, the screen goes to black. Nanami wakes you up. You go to the military strategist. You talk through some story. You go to some place. You do random interactions. You go through a million cutscenes. They tell you to go to bed. You go to bed. Nanami wakes you up. You do this again. Maybe this time you set up a party. You probably won't do a dungeon. Just, the game becomes such a chore because the reason this actually is an inferior game, a series of games to the Squaresoft RPGs of that time, a big surprise I know, is because all these games have balance issues because of the time and place that they were made and the lack of Q&A relative to now, essentially. But the Squaresoft games still, despite massive ambitious stories, and the fact that the Suikoden story to some degree is ambitious, but not to the same weird cosmic degree as some of the Squaresoft ones, doesn't really matter, but they still sort of put gameplay first. They still cared that there's dungeons and boss fights that are meaningful. Suikoden 2 on hard is a joke. It's a total joke. The Mist Demon, who's like the first fight, and maybe like a Bone Dragon inside one of the first castles you go to, are the only ones that are like meaningfully difficult at all. The last boss is pretty good, honestly. But still, these aren't like shocking health pools. You know what I mean? Like, you never really are like totally shocked by how it goes. But the way the dungeon designs are, the amount of dungeons that are like just walking through a forest path with nothing really interesting happens is sort of a squandered opportunity, because the game's landscapes, especially in the second one, their backgrounds, the way they stock the houses, how alive towns look and how alive houses look within the towns, way more so in the second game than the first game. By the way, as an aside, they put so much more effort into the second game than the first game, but that might just be how much more effort the original games had put into them. But it's a very, very sparse skeletal design to a lot of the first game, which is a game that you can really steamroll through. But the second game, how incredible the amount of detail there is in terms of, you can click anything, you can read description boxes for anything, that all the ornaments and objects within these houses are amazing. It's like really, really, really amazing. But ultimately, you could argue that there's like a completionist satisfaction to how you play through the game, which is wandering back and forth, backtracking constantly, and sort of like putzing around looking for characters. But it's still a little bit unsatisfying, and it slows the pace of the game down greatly. So I'm sure I could go on in some other details. I love the idea of the trading post system and the sort of it being generally a stock market, but again, it's not really necessary because you make so much money just from fighting people randomly on the map. I love building up your castle. I love how much stuff there is to do in the castle. The most fun I had in the entire game, honestly, is probably the Iron Chef competitions and just like the concept of seeing how your castle grows. But the games are kind of a chore. And that is surprising, because this is, to underline for the fourth time, one of the most beautiful games visually and musically that the system and the generation ever had. They're incredible. They look great. There's so many fascinating characters and so many fun people to use. But like, you get jack shit all opportunity to use any of them. It doesn't matter. The battles aren't hard. There's so many characters. It's impressive how many of them you have unique runes and unique ways to go about having some sort of interesting special attack, but what chances do you actually have to use any of these people for more than 10 minutes, one half-ass dungeon? There's not that many dungeons, there's not that many bosses. So there's so much about this is so good, but I've had this sort of like little feeling inside me all this time being like, well, actually I love these games so much and they're actually like just as good. And they're like, someday they'll sort of like be this like undiscovered gem that I'll really, really appreciate and finally have that Suikoden 2 playthrough. But upon having done it, they're sick, but they're not that fun. And that's ultimately sort of like the larger impression I got from it, that it sort of felt like a chore despite having an outstanding story, but the story takes too much precedent.